July 2, 1943, Castelvetrano Airfield, Sicily. The pilot of a Focke-Wulf 190 never spotted the P-40 Warhawk diving from above until streams of machine gun fire ripped through his aircraft, sending it spiraling into the Sicilian countryside. At the controls was First Lieutenant Charles B. Hall, a 22-year-old from Brazil, Indiana. In that instant, Hall achieved what German Luftwaffe commanders had considered impossible. A black pilot had downed one of their elite fighters. The swastika that Hall painted on his P-40L Warhawk that afternoon became the first of 112 enemy aircraft eventually destroyed by the men whom the Germans reportedly came to call Schwarze Vogelmenschen, the black birdmen. In Nazi Germany, racial ideology deemed black people Untermensch, subhuman, supposedly incapable of mastering complex machines or showing courage in combat. The Nuremberg laws had even forbidden marriages between Germans and people of African descent. Yet over the skies of the Mediterranean, this ideology collided with reality as 992 trained pilots from Tuskegee, Alabama, systematically dismantled both German aircraft and German illusions of racial superiority. What German pilots did not realize as they climbed to intercept U.S. bombers in 1943 was that they were facing some of the most rigorously trained, highly motivated aviators in the entire U.S. Army Air Forces, men who had endured obstacles their white counterparts never encountered, who trained longer and harder, and who carried into battle not only the duty of defending their nation but also the burden of proving an entire race's ability. The statistics would speak for themselves. 15,000 combat sorties, 578 missions, 112 aerial victories, and a bomber escort loss rate lower than that of white fighter groups. Numbers that forced even diehard Nazi ideologues to confront the collapse of their racial myths. The path to that first aerial victory did not begin in combat but in the hostile reality of segregation in America. In 1925, the U.S. Army War College had issued a report titled Employment of Negro Manpower in War, which concluded, compared to the white man, he is admittedly of inferior mentality. He is inherently weak in character. According to this official study, black soldiers supposedly lacked the intelligence for technical positions and the courage for combat leadership. Yet even as the military clung to such prejudices, individual pioneers were already disproving them. Eugene Bullard had flown for France in World War I because the U.S. would not allow him to serve. Bessie Coleman earned her pilot's license in France in 1921 after being rejected by every American flight school. By the 1930s, Chicago's Coffey School of Aeronautics was producing dozens of black civilian pilots, proving that flying ability knew no racial boundary. As Europe edged closer to war, pressure for change grew. Civil rights leaders like Walter White of the NAACP, labor leader A. Philip Randolph, and Judge William H. Hastie lobbied tirelessly for black participation in military aviation. Black newspapers such as the Chicago Defender, the Pittsburgh Courier, and the Baltimore Afro-American challenged the Roosevelt administration with a blunt question: how could America fight for democracy abroad while denying it at home? On April 3, 1939, Public Law 18 cracked the door open. Senator Harry H. Schwartz added an amendment requiring the Civil Aeronautics Authority to designate at least one school in the civilian pilot training program specifically for black students. It was a grudging concession framed within segregation, but it was a start. When Franklin Roosevelt campaigned for a third term in 1940, he needed black votes in northern cities. On January 16, 1941, Secretary of War Henry L. Stimson announced the creation of the 99th Pursuit Squadron, an all-black flying unit. But even this announcement came with a telling caveat. The program was to be considered an experiment to see if African Americans could be trained as combat pilots. Captain Benjamin O. Davis, Jr. understood the weight of this command when he led 26
pilots of the 99th Fighter Squadron
to North Africa in April. Parngchi, the son of the first black general in U.S. history, Davis had endured 4 years of silence at West Point, where no white cadet would speak to him outside of official duties. Now he led men who carried the hopes of 13 million black Americans. The 99th was assigned to Farjuna, Tunisia, under Colonel William W. Mamier of the The 33rd Fighter Group, commander openly skeptical of black pilots. Momyer relegated them to patrols over the Mediterranean, keeping them away from major combat. And when they did not immediately achieve outstanding results, he used it as justification for his doubts. Their first combat mission came on June 2, 1943, in an attack on the Italian-held island of Pantelleria. As their battle-worn P-40 Warhawks climbed toward the target, German fighters suddenly appeared. The Tuskegee pilots held formation, protecting their bombers. No planes were lost on either side, but the Germans learned their first lesson. These men would not break under pressure. But it was July 2, 1943 that truly changed everything. Charles Hall was on his 8th mission, escorting B-25 Mitchell bombers striking Castelvetrano airfield in Sicily. Suddenly, 2 Focke-Wulf 190s closed in on the bomber formation. Hall later recalled, "I saw 2 Focke-Wulfs shadowing the bombers right after the bombs were released. I maneuvered between them and the bombers, managed to cut inside the enemy fighters and fired a long burst. My tracers ripped into the second aircraft. He tried turning left but abruptly stalled, plunging straight into the ground. When Hall touched down, the entire base exploded with celebration. Black ground crews who had endured constant insults and dismissive treatment from white personnel finally had their vindication. Hall's triumph was the first confirmed aerial kill by an African American pilot in U.S. military history. By January 1944, the 99th Fighter Squadron had been engaged for 7 months. But Colonel Momyer submitted a scathing report, claiming the unit lacked aggressiveness and recommending their removal from combat. The document landed on the desk of General Henry Hap Arnold, who seriously considered terminating the experiment. Then came Anzio. On January 27, 1944, the Luftwaffe launched massive raids against Allied forces at the Anzio beachhead. 15 pilots of the 99th, flying outdated P-40s, confronted superior Focke-Wulf 190s. What followed silenced critics. Over 2 days of intense combat, the 99th shot down multiple enemy aircraft and accounts, ranged between 8 and 13 victories. Captain Charles Hall scored 2 more kills, raising his tally to 3. In just 48 hours flying inferior machines, the squadron destroyed more enemy planes than in their entire previous 7 months of combat. The War Department ordered a comparative study of the 99th against other P-40 units. The conclusion was clear. They were performing on par with white squadrons. Anzio proved once and for all that black pilots could excel under fire when given the chance. In May 1944, the 332nd Fighter Group, combining the 99th, 100th, 301st, and 302nd Fighter Squadrons, received new orders that would elevate them from outsiders to legends. They were to join the 15th Air Force as bomber escorts on long, dangerous missions deep into Nazi territory. At Ramatelli Airfield on Italy's Adriatic coast, Colonel Benjamin O. Davis Jr. gathered his men. "We cannot afford to lose bombers," he told them. "Our mission is not to rack up personal kills. Our mission is to bring those bombers home." That principle became their guiding combat doctrine. Stay with the bombers no matter what. In June 1944, General Nathan Twining introduced a new identification system for fighter groups. Each squadron would adopt distinctive markings. The 332nd was assigned red, not just on the nose or bands, but the entire tail section painted crimson. Their P-51 Mustangs with red tails, spinners, and nose bands became unmistakable. Bomber crews at first had no idea their escorts were black. They only knew these. Fighters never abandoned them for easy kills. Word spread quickly. If possible, request the red tails. On July 18, 1944, the red tails faced their ultimate test. Colonel Davis led 66 Mustangs to rendezvous with bombers striking the Luftwaffe base at Memmingen, Germany. The bombers arrived late, and Davis made a fateful choice: orbit over enemy territory rather than return. When the bombers finally appeared, nearly 100 German fighters attacked from multiple directions. The Luftwaffe gambled that overwhelming numbers could shatter the Red Tails' protective shield. In the savage battle that followed, the 332nd claimed 11 to 12 enemy aircraft, yet within 20 minutes 15 B-17s were shot down. The 332nd lost 3 of its own: Lieutenants Robert Hutton, Wellington Irving, and Alfred Brown. Critics pointed to the bomber losses as evidence that black pilots couldn't handle large-scale engagements. But operational analysis told another story. The 332nd had faced impossible odds, arriving just as massive German forces had already engaged. Their intervention prevented a total catastrophe. By March 1945, conventional Luftwaffe fighters could no longer contest Allied air supremacy, but Germany still had one trump card, the Messerschmitt Me-262, the world's first operational jet fighter. With speeds of 540 mph, it could outpace any propeller-driven aircraft. On March 24, 1945, the 332nd Fighter Group received one of its toughest assignments, a 600-mile round-trip escort mission to Berlin, targeting the Daimler-Benz Tank Works. Intelligence warned that Jagdgeschwader 7 would deploy Me-262s to defend the target. Colonel Davis led 43 P-51 straight into the heart of the Reich. As they neared Berlin, the largest concentration of German jets ever assembled appeared. Lieutenant Roscoe Brown had studied the jets' vulnerabilities. "We knew they were faster," he explained. "So instead of chasing, we turned into their blind spots." Brown brought down one Me-262, later reporting, "I pulled into a 15-degree climb, fired 3 long bursts from 2,000 feet, and almost instantly saw the pilot bail out at 4,500 feet. Lieutenant Earl Lane achieved the seemingly impossible, downing a Me-262 with a 2,000-yard deflection shot using the new K-14 computing gun sight. Lieutenant Charles Brantley claimed a third jet that same day. The destruction of 3 Me-262s in one engagement surpassed the totals many entire groups achieved during the war. In a single afternoon, the Red Tails exceeded the combined American tally of jet kills up to that point. The 332nd Fighter Group was awarded a Distinguished Unit Citation for their performance. Not every encounter between the Tuskegee Airmen and German forces ended in triumph. 32 pilots became prisoners of war, and their experiences revealed the complex clash between Nazi ideology and military reality. Lieutenant Alexander Jefferson was shot down on August 12, 1944, during his 19th mission. His P-51 took flak over southern France while strafing radar sites. At his interrogation, the German officer displayed shockingly detailed intelligence on the 32nd Fighter Group. The interrogator knew about Ramitelli Airfield, our squadron commanders, even personal details about my parents' home in Detroit, Jefferson recalled. He knew my father was a teacher and my mother's maiden name. Their intelligence was frighteningly thorough. Inside Stalag Luft 3, Jefferson was treated like any other American officer. White bomber crew POWs often approached him with gratitude for red tail protection. These interactions, impossible in segregated America, came naturally inside German prison camps. The irony wasn't lost on Jefferson. Here I was in a Nazi POW camp, being treated more equally by white Americans than I would be back home. When the war ended and Jefferson returned to the U.S., segregation greeted him immediately at the disembarkation point. Meanwhile, German pilots reportedly acknowledged the Red Tails' skill, giving them the nickname Schwarze Vogelmännchen, Blackbird Men. American bomber crews became their loudest champions. These men, facing death on every mission, cared only about survival, not race. Stories about the Red Tails spread, their unique flying style, the way they waggled wings in greeting, their tight formations, and their refusal to abandon crippled bombers. To the bomber crews, they were Red Tail angels. The statistics backed up that reputation. Air Force historian Dr. Daniel Hallman found that bombers, escorted by the 382nd Fighter Group, lost only 27 aircraft to enemy fighters, compared to an average of 46 for other P-51 groups in the 15th Air Force. This superior record was maintained despite the Red Tails flying some of the longest and most dangerous missions of the war. By the war's end, the Tuskegee Airmen had built a combat record that shattered every pre-war assumption about black military capability. Combat operations: 1578 combat missions, over 15,000 sorties, Hans V-9 bomber escort missions, 311 missions for the 15th Air Force. Enemy aircraft destroyed: 112 enemy aircraft shot down in aerial combat, 150 destroyed on the ground. 3 Me-262 jet fighters downed on March 24, 1945. Ground targets destroyed: 950 railcars, trucks, and motor vehicles, 2 E-4 locomotives. Italian destroyer TI-22 Giuseppe Missori, damaged beyond repair on June 25, 1944. Protection record: only 27 bombers. lost to enemy fighters versus the 46 aircraft average of other groups maintained across 79 escort missions. Individual achievements: Lee Archer, 4 confirmed kills. Joseph Ellsbury, 4 kills, including 3 FW-190s in a single day, July 12, 1944. Edward Toppins, 4 victories. Clarence Lucky Lester, 3 kills in 1 mission, July 18, 1944. Decorations: 96 Distinguished Flying Crosses, 44 Air Medals, 14 Bronze Stars, 8 Purple Hearts, 3 Distinguished Unit Citations for the 99th Fighter Squadron, 1 Distinguished Unit Citation for the 302nd Fighter Group. Human cost: 66 pilots killed in action, 2 captured as POWs, 84 lost in training or non-combat missions. Their transformation from doubted experiment to legendary unit wasn't just about bravery, it reflected superior training and disciplined use of technology. Tuskegee pilots logged more flight hours than their white counterparts, 300 compared to 200. They drilled relentlessly in formation flying, knowing discipline would be their edge in combat. The washout rate at Tuskegee was 60%, compared to 40% for white cadets, meaning only the very best graduated. Colonel Noel Parrish, commander at Tuskegee, called them a super-selected group. Their progression through aircraft also tells the story. The 99th began with outdated P-40 Warhawks, already obsolete when they reached North Africa. These Allison engine fighters were inferior to German BFE 109s and FW-190s in nearly every way. Yet Tuskegee pilots used the P-40's turning ability and rugged build to hold their own. The arrival of P-51 Mustangs in July 1944 changed everything. The North American P-51D, powered by the Packard-built Merlin engine, could reach 437 mi. The Mustang's 650 caliber machine guns could tear apart any enemy aircraft. More importantly, its long range, over 600 miles with drop tanks, made it capable of escorting bombers to any target deep inside the Reich. But every pilot who scored a kill depended on dozens of support personnel, mechanics, armorers, crew chiefs who kept the red tails in the air. Of the roughly 16,000 men who served with the Tuskegee Airmen, fewer than 1,000 were pilots. The rest were the unsung heroes whose work made victory possible. The ground crews performed miracles with what little they had. Ramatelli Airfield in Italy was primitive compared to other American bases. Spare parts were scarce, with the 382nd often last in line for supplies. Yet their aircraft readiness rate, the percentage of planes available for combat, matched or even surpassed white units. These men also faced danger. German raids on Ramatelli were rare but devastating. On March 24, 1944, a bombing attack killed several ground personnel. Even under fire, the men kept working, pulling aircraft away from burning fuel dumps. The Allied bombing campaign over Europe became the ultimate proving ground for the Tuskegee Airmen. Each B-17 Flying Fortress cost $238,000 and carried 10 highly trained crewmen. Losing a single bomber was a strategic blow that rippled through the war effort. That's why bomber protection mattered more than racking up fighter kills. Colonel Benjamin Davis drilled this lesson into his men. Resist the urge to chase enemy fighters. Anyone can shoot down a plane if they abandon their duty, he said. It takes discipline to stay with the bombers when the enemy runs. From combat experience, the Red Tails refined escort tactics into a 3-layer defense. Close escort weaving directly above the bombers, medium escort positioned to block incoming fighters, and high escort scanning for diving attacks. This required flawless coordination and strict discipline. The Tuskegee Airmen fought 2 wars at once, against fascism overseas and racism at home. Their combat record challenged both Nazi racial myths and American segregation, proving that skill in the skies was beyond race. Their victories over the Luftwaffe made headlines in black newspapers, but were often downplayed or ignored by the mainstream press. The Pittsburgh Courier's Double V campaign, Victory Abroad and Victory at Home, held up the Tuskegee Airmen as living proof of both goals. The contrast with German awareness was striking. By 1945, Luftwaffe pilots knew exactly who flew the red-tailed Mustangs, calling them Schwarze Vogelmenschen, blackbird men. Meanwhile, many white Americans had no idea black pilots were even serving. That ignorance was no accident. The War Department rarely publicized the Tuskegee Airmen's success. Victory in Europe brought not parades but uncertainty. While white squadrons prepared for celebrations, the 392nd faced questions about their future. The Army Air Forces still intended to enforce segregation, despite overwhelming combat proof of its futility. For decades, the achievements of the Tuskegee Airmen were largely erased from America's mainstream memory. Individual pilots carried that silence. Lee Archer, with 4 confirmed victories, went on to work as a business executive but rarely spoke of his wartime record. "Nobody believed me anyway," he recalled. "A black fighter pilot must be lying." In 1948, President Harry Truman signed Executive Order 9981, desegregating the U.S. military, a decision influenced by the Tuskegee Airmen's combat record. In 1954, Benjamin Davis, who had led the Red Tails over Berlin, became the Air Force's first black general. Recognition came slowly, but it did come. In 2007, President George W. Bush awarded the Congressional Gold Medal to the Tuskegee Airmen. Only 300 of the original pilots lived to attend, many waiting more than 60 years for their country's acknowledgement. Their transformation from ridicule to respect was not legend but documented fact. The statistics remain undeniable. 1. Enemy aircraft destroyed in aerial combat, including 3 Me-262 jets in a single mission. 150 aircraft destroyed on the ground. Only 27 bombers lost compared to an average of 46 for other escort groups. 96 Distinguished Flying Crosses awarded to 332nd Fighter Group pilots. The so-called Schwarze mention proved that prejudice collapses when faced with undeniable ability. Every German plane destroyed, every bomber brought home, every mission completed added to the case that race had nothing to do with courage or skill. Roscoe Brown, who shot down a German jet over Berlin, summed it up. "We didn't just fight the Germans. We fought ignorance, prejudice, and hatred. And we won all 3 battles." The Tuskegee Airmen didn't just win dogfights. They changed history. They fought 3 wars at once against the Luftwaffe in combat, against Nazi racial theory through performance, and against American segregation through excellence. Given the chance, the Tuskegee Airmen soared, turning mockery into respect, prejudice into acceptance, and enemies into witnesses of greatness.